From the Cronkite studios in downtown Phoenix, this is Cronkite News.
Good evening and welcome to Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Blake McHugh and thank you for joining us. Tonight, reports from our Washington, D.C. bureau. We take a look back at the top agenda items from the nation's capital.
Good news and bad news today from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on the overprescribing of opioids. The CDC said that the amount of opioids prescribed per person in the U.S. started falling after 2010. But by 2015, it was still almost 3 times as high as it was 20 years ago. And in Arizona, prescriptions in most counties were still well above the national average. Cronkite News reporter Alex Valdez has more tonight from our Washington, D.C. bureau.
Yes, the CDC says the prescription of opioids has hit Appalachian states the most hardest, but no state has escaped from the problem. And that was true for Arizona, where Governor Doug Ducey declared a state of emergency last month in response to the opioid crisis.
Learning today from the CDC is that we've been making very little progress in promoting more cautious prescribing, that there's much more that needs to be done. You know, they compared our current levels to the level of prescribing in 1999 and said that we're 3 times higher than 1999.
In Arizona, the number of prescriptions have declined along with the national numbers, but prescriptions in more than half of the counties in the state are still above national average, in some cases 2 or 3 times higher.
There are striking geographic differences in the way opioids are prescribed. In certain parts of the United States, doctors are prescribing much more aggressively, and the CDC doesn't think that the explanation is that in these regions more people have pain. They think this means that in these regions doctors are too aggressive in their use of opioids.
Kalani said one possible solution would be to require a warning about the risk for families when they are prescribed more than 3 days of the drugs. A prescription registry was just one of the things Governor Doug Ducey was calling for when he declared a state of emergency just last month. We reached out to the governor's office but have not heard a response from their office. Reporting in Washington, I'm Alex Valdez, Cronkite News.
Arizona and other states have seen a steady increase in an opioid drug-related deaths since 2015. Cronkite News reporter Noel Lilly met with congressmen who are working from both sides of the aisle to stop this epidemic.
No death is a good death. That's what Arizona Representative Tom O'Halloran said this week at a press conference with the bipartisan heroin task force. Members of the task force met to discuss and introduce legislation in the hopes of fighting the opioid epidemic in the U.S.
This is something that's totally out of control right now, both from the standpoint of Arizona being a border state as a transport location and a distribution point.
O'Halloran, a former narcotics officer, said the drug epidemic is unlike anything the country has faced before.
Just recently in Arizona, this week I think it was, that we had 115 overdoses and 15 people die.
The bipartisan heroin task force was in 2015 as a means to combat drug addiction in various states.
This opioid and heroin epidemic has torn our communities and families apart. In 2015, over 50,000 Americans died of drug overdose.
The task force introduced legislation such as Jesse's Law, which would ensure that doctors have access to a patient's history of addiction prior to treatment or care. According to the Arizona Department of Health Services, more than 2 Arizonans died every day from opioid overdoses in 2016.
I mean, these are our kids. These are our neighbors. There are consequences for this, and it is heartbreaking when you meet the families and the parents or attend the funerals.
The task force said that teamwork would be needed to fight drug use.
We all agree that we have a crisis, that we have to work together to find solutions that we can agree on.
In Washington, Noel Lilly, Cronkite News.
The bills discussed during the press conference are scheduled for the next legislative session. Cronkite News is dedicated to covering the opioid crisis in Arizona and nationwide. Our documentary, Hooked RX, From Prescription to Addiction, highlights the problem of painkillers here in our state. You can watch the documentary and find resources for getting help online at hookedrx.org. The U.S. Supreme Court wrapped up its 2016 term today with a flurry of rulings related to a border issue. Cronkite News reporter Lowell Lilly was at the Supreme Court.
In the last day before their summer recess, the Supreme Court gave a second chance to a Mexican family whose son was shot by a U.S. Border Patrol agent in 2010. Sergio Adrian Hernandez Guerrera had been playing near the Texas-Mexico border with friends in 2010 when he was fatally shot by Border Patrol agent Jesus Mesa Jr. Hernandez's family sued Mesa in federal court, but the lower courts threw the case out, saying that the Constitution's protections did not apply to Hernandez as he was not a U.S. citizen and was standing in Mexico when he was killed. But the Supreme Court today said the lower courts must revisit the case. This case is reminiscent of a 2012 incident in Nogales, Mexico, where Border Patrol agent Lonnie Schwartz on the U.S. side of the border shot and killed 16-year-old Jose Antonio Elena Rodriguez on the Mexican side. The Rodriguez family sued the officer, but the case was pushed back several times and is now scheduled for hearing in Tucson on October 12th. It's not clear yet what effect the El Paso ruling today will have on the Nogales case later this year. Customs and Border Protection officials declined to comment on the ruling today. Outside the Supreme Court in Washington, Noelle Lilly, Cronkite News.
A bill to drop polygraph tests for Border Patrol applicants passed the House yesterday, but it was met with pushback from some advocates and some Democrats. Reporter Emma Lockhart spoke with Arizona legislators about the controversy.
Tensions ran high yesterday as the House debated Representative Martha McSally's bill that makes it easier to hire Border Patrol agents. The bill will waive the polygraph test for veteran, military, and law enforcement applying to Customs and Border Protection.
This is something we've been working on with the last administration, again, to support veterans and others in law enforcement that have already put their lives on the line for us, and gives the tools to be able to close some of these very critical manning gaps.
Gaps like the current 2,800 unfilled Border Patrol positions. Supporters of the bill say the waiver will help speed up the hiring process, but opponents like Arizona Representative Raul Grijalva are cautious.
These individuals, I think, need to have the full background check to assure that in the process of expediting and making the hiring easier, we're not creating other problems as we go along.
He says that 60% of Border Patrol applicants aren't passing the polygraph. But McSally says that doesn't mean applicants aren't qualified.
You know, we've had highly decorated combat veterans, constituents of mine, that have gone through this test and come back with these, false negatives, and have come to say, like, they had a horrific experience with the whole thing. So there's a separate issue that's being looked at right now in parallel.
As Congress debates, the Department of Homeland Security is piloting a more accurate polygraph test. In Washington, Emma Lockhart, Cronkite News.
A similar bill sponsored by Arizona Senators John McCain and Jeff Flake is pending, where it is waiting for a full vote by the chamber. One part of President Donald Trump's immigration reforms that often gets overlooked is the creation of VOICE, the Victims of Immigration Crime Enforcement Office. Critics say the office unfairly stereotypes all immigrants, but supporters say crime victims need the assistance the office is set up to provide. One of those supporters is an Arizona mom who was back in Washington this week to continue her fight for victim assistance. Cronkite News reporter Alex Valdez has more on that story in our Washington bureau.
Mesa resident Marianne Mendoza lost her son, Sergeant Brandon Mendoza, in 2014 when an undocumented immigrant slammed into his car head-on. Since then, she has made it her mission to fight back against illegal immigration, a fight that brought her to Washington this week.
Never envisioned that that's where I would end up when I started this fight for my son's, memory and his loss. And
Mendoza was in Washington for the official launch of Advocates for Victims of Illegal Alien Crime. She co-founded the group with the goal to promote American safety and security.
We are victims who have created an organization that victims of illegal crime, no matter what it is, whether it's a murder or a rape, identity theft, assault, any of these crimes, we want the people to come out of the shadows.
She hopes the coalition can serve as a resource to victims of any immigration-related crime. Or, as she describes it, the organization wants to be truth tellers, truth seekers, and educators of the public.
We want to be a support system for these victims to try and help to direct them in the right places to get the help that they need. We do have an attorney on board who will help give them legal advice.
Mendoza, who has been advocating on behalf of victims' families since her son's death, now hopes to see the group carry on that mission, working with politicians to see immigration laws enforced. Mendoza had that message in mind today when she and a group of advocates met with President Trump at the White House.
We are going to make sure that the president does follow up on his promises and get the border wall built. We do want to work with Congress to make sure that they stop roadblocking our president, allowing him to move forward with national security.
I talked to Mendoza shortly after her meeting with President Trump this afternoon. She told me the meeting went very well and that she and other advocates got their message across to the president. Live in Washington, Alex Valdez, Cronkite News.
Fathers often play an important role in the lives of their children, but advocates say for the children of immigrants, that role is being taken away.
13-year-old Joel Massey only had one request for President Trump today in Washington. He says he just wants his dad back.
He said that he can't live the dream of a life in America with his family to stand beside him. He said that he has to live in fear of persecution. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Yeah.
Massey's father, Areno Massey, was deported last month after living in the U.S. for 16 years. That's why today the immigration reform group America's Voice teamed up with New Jersey Representative Frank Pallone to speak at the Capitol about the families left behind when a father is deported. The group says this issue affects families nationwide, especially in states like Arizona.
Well, Arizona is often called ground zero in the immigration debate. So Arizona is disproportionately affected because it has a large immigrant population that's now being directly impacted by these cruel policies.
According to the Urban Institute and Migration Policy Institute, when a father is deported, the family's income is likely to drop an average of 73%.
The group called on President Trump and the Department of Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly to stop separating families.
To approach Father's Day, we wanted to take note of the fact that this administration is targeting low-priority people, dads, who are providing for their family, who have never committed a crime.
The group said that they hope to eventually be able to create an easier path to legal citizenship.
I-246 stays of removal.
The advocate's plea could be a tough sell in Washington. Elsewhere on the Capitol today, the acting director of ICE said that although the ICE targets illegal immigrants, any kind of illegal immigrants are subject to arrest as well. Live in Washington, Noelle Lilly, Cronkite News.
The Commerce Department brought foreign investors together with U.S. economic development officials at the Select USA Investment Summit in Washington today. Arizona officials were there pitching the state with hundreds of others as an enticing place for business investment. Our reporter Emma Lockhart is live in our D.C. bureau and tells us what state and city officials had to say about Arizona to business leaders from around the world.
Always be closing. It's a common phrase in sales and one that Arizona economic officials were using today at the Select USA Investment Summit. Their goal, to draw in foreign business investors to Arizona.
We're looking forward to closing some deals and bringing some people to Arizona.
Economic officials from Phoenix, Glendale, Chandler, and Gilbert came together at the Select USA Summit today. Their top selling points, the state's local cost, its skilled workforce, and growing innovation. Innovation like automation that Arizona is already marketing.
We launched a new campaign called the Connected Place.
where we actually hone in on autonomous vehicles, wearable technology, Industry 4.0, which is automation, and ultimately cybersecurity.
Bob Denny from the Arizona Commerce Authority credits Governor Doug Ducey for much of the state's success.
He has a lot of experience in that world and understanding what it takes to make a business work, what regulations are stifling to businesses, and is doing all that he can to make it a pro-business environment.
According to Select USA, Arizona received $232.9 million in foreign direct investments in 2017. And more is on the way. Arizona officials announced at the summit this week that the Italian company Aquafil plans to build a manufacturing facility in Arizona.
And despite President Donald Trump's sometimes tough talks on trade, vendors at the summit actually said that the people he appointed as trade representatives could actually help sell the U.S. to investors. Live in Washington, Emma Lockhart, Cronkite News. When Arizona students return to school in August, it could be under a new law. SB 1431 expands the eligibility of Arizona's school voucher program. Cronkite News reporter Noelle Lilly spoke with both opponents and supporters of the bill to find out what Arizona parents and students can expect this fall.
Earlier this year, Governor Doug Ducey signed a bill that would make all 1.1 Arizona school children eligible for the state's voucher program. That law will take effect on August 9th of this year, but not if grassroots groups like Save Our Schools Arizona have anything to do with it.
Arizona's public school system is already one of the worst funded. It's the least invested in the entire country. We should not be finding and designing programs that take even more money away from these starving schools that serve 95% of our kids.
Arizona's voucher program, the Empowerment Scholarship Account, was first created in 2011 primarily for students with disabilities. Families are given money that would otherwise be used for their students' public school. Instead, parents can use this money to pay for a private or religious school.
Arizona was the pioneer in developing these. The idea behind education savings accounts is really to empower parents to customize the education of their child.
At a panel discussion with the Urban Institute, Wolf said that studies have shown that these programs often benefit their public school counterparts.
Teachers and administrators say that it can be easier for them to educate the students who remain because they all want to be there. Public school performance actually goes up when private school choice initiatives are launched or expanded.
But SOS Arizona says the program doesn't have enough restrictions. States like Indiana set an income cap to decide who can receive the vouchers in order to prioritize low-income families who wouldn't be able to afford private school. This is not the case in Arizona.
We see the statistics in Arizona year after year after year that vouchers only help affluent families.
SOS Arizona says they hope to fight the law and are currently petitioning to have it pushed to the 2018 November ballot. The group has to collect 75,321 signatures from Arizonans by August 1st. In Washington, Noelle Lilly, Cronkite News.
Applications for the voucher program will be on a first-come, first-served basis. But Department of Education officials say applications under the new qualifications are not yet being accepted.
This might not be your typical Air Force. The Mom's Clean Air Force has been putting together a play-in for the past 4 years on Capitol Hill to highlight the importance of clean air. But this year's play-in comes just weeks after the U.S. said it would pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. Cronkite News reporter Alex Valdez has the story from Washington.
Mesa residents Kathy Moore Almeida and her daughter Anna Rose traveled to Washington, D.C. to protest against President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord.
Clean air is imperative. We need to clean up our atmosphere. It's affecting human health. I'm thinking about my daughter's grandkids and their grandkids, and it's something that we need to address, or it's not going to end well for us.
The president said the Paris Agreement, which called for reductions in emissions, would cost U.S. jobs, and that it was too costly for too little environmental gain. But the Mesa mom and daughter said the reasoning overlooks the importance of clean air for people like Anna Rose, who have asthma.
A lot
lot of kids at my school can't breathe on dirty air days, so I mean, I'm one of them. And we all love doing sports, so one of the things I always tell them is, hey, we want to be athletic and we want to do things, so what are you going to help us do?
They hope to bring their story directly to lawmakers to let them know about the health issues that many kids like Anna Rose face in day-to-day life. Health issues, they say, are due to dirty air.
Nothing more important to any parent, any good parent, than their kids and their well-being and their safety and their future and their happiness and, their health. So, as far as I'm concerned, I don't have any choice. This is a do or die matter.
14-year-old Anna Rose echoes her mom's words and hopes for the future.
I want clean air for future generations and my generation, and I don't want kids to be sick anymore.
If lawmakers don't listen, Maura Almeida said voters will speak at the ballot box.
Yeah, they need to be listening to the will of the people, or we're going to vote them out. That's the bottom line. I've had it. A lot of my community members have had it.
In Washington, Alex Valdez, Cronkite News.
The Maura Almeidas have been to Washington for 2 play-ins already. They're also active at home, where Anna Rose has set up a tax-exempt nonprofit, the Kids Climate Action Network.
You might not know what element in the Hope Diamond has the largest molecular mass, but an 8th grader from Arizona does. And he showed off that knowledge at an Arizona national competition today in Washington. Reporter Emma Lockhart has more from our Washington bureau.
I'm excited about chemistry because it just tells us so much about how the world works and how we work.
Isaiah Hazelwood from Scottsdale put his knowledge of chemistry to the test today. He joined middle schoolers from across the country at the You Be the Chemist National Challenge. He shares how he prepared for the big day.
I conversed a lot with my chemistry teacher, Miss Cooney, and the previous Arizona Challenge winner, Logan Liu. In addition to that, I've studied the provided materials and a AP chemistry textbook.
All 42 students started off in the preliminary rounds, answering multiple choice questions.
And the correct answer is B.
Some questions that threw Isaiah off.
I'm excited about having completed the preliminary rounds. However, the questions are a bit harder than I expected, and I'm not as certain that I'll manage to get into a top 4 spot.
They are tough questions. As a person with a chemistry degree, there were some that I really had to pause and think about. And so you have the dichotomy of not only are they hard questions, but you're on a timeline.
Although intimidated, Isaiah was able to survive and advance to the second round with 14 other students this morning, with 3 more rounds to go before a national winner is chosen tonight. In Washington, Emma Lockhart, Cronkite News.
Isaiah did not advance to the quarterfinal round.
And Made in America Week continues in Washington, D.C., a week that kicked off with displays of American-made products at the White House. Cronkite News reporter Emma Lockhart spoke with the Arizona company that represented the state from our Washington bureau.
The Trump White House is making a habit out of trying to get its message across by having theme weeks that are built around a specific topic. There was Infrastructure Week, Workforce Development Week, now it's Made in America Week, to focus on, well, goods made in America.
From tractors displayed on the front lawn to cowboy hats that President Donald Trump tried on himself, American-made products from each state were at the White House, including Ping Golf from Arizona.
We're not a huge company in Arizona, but we're proud of what we do, and to see that we're one of 50 companies that they asked to come visit it was an honor to be there.
Ping's golf clubs are assembled in Phoenix, some with American parts, others of international parts. They say the putter they showcased at the event, however, is 100% USA made.
We think it gives us a competitive advantage by being able to put stuff together, custom built in Phoenix, and get it to our customer faster.
Trump viewed the products himself.
As I walked through the halls, we saw so many great companies.
And signed a Made in America proclamation, all to help promote goods made in the U.S. Solheim says political views aside, he was happy to be in the president's company.
To be in the White House and to say hi and say thank you for what you're doing and your service is an honor. And it's an honor for me as an American to be able to have that opportunity.
Solheim told me he's not exactly sure how Ping got chosen for the White House event, but he was thrilled to get the call last week nonetheless. Live in Washington, Emma Lockhart, Cronkite News.
When you take a walk down the street in Old Town Alexandria, Virginia, you'll see a lot of old brick buildings filled with history, but chances are you will also hear something you never heard before, as Tyler Finger found out. Arizona and Alexandria, while thousands of miles apart, have at least one musical connection.
On this quiet street just outside of our nation's capital, there's a traditionally trained musician making music with a not-so-traditional instrument. This is Jamie Turner's stage for the day, where he takes two seemingly unmusical items, glass goblets and water, and manages to make music.
There's something about the sound of glass that eclipses any sound I've ever worked with.
For nearly the last 4 decades, Jamie has been lighting up crowds. He's played almost everywhere, from the street corner outside Washington, D.C., to one of his favorites, thousands of miles away.
They scheduled me to perform in Native American schools all over Arizona for the whole week. It was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had in my life.
The trip was a chance to share his musical world with others.
They never heard anything like it, and they knew Western culture pretty well, but this was totally beyond anything they'd ever experienced, and I think that's one of the reasons why they were so delighted.
In Alexandria, his fans can't get enough.
I'm still amazed at how he can get out all those great songs with just a few pieces of glass and some water.
I know what it's like as a musician performing for audiences. I've never had an instrument where I just set up and immediately I have a crowd.
Bridging a divide between language and music.
I'm just so grateful to be able to play an instrument where I'm able to relate to just about any culture anywhere.
In Alexandria, Virginia, Tyler Finger, Cronkite News.
Thanks for joining us, and for top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.